God, they've caught up with us. There you go, sweetie.
The business community in Vancouver has learned that it makes good business sense to make their buildings accessible, to open up their doors so that we can go in and shop like everybody else. They want to go to restaurants, they want to travel, they want to enjoy various forms of entertainment.
What are you for?
We're gonna see fishing place that for handicapped people can fish here. We are worrying that we're gonna get a big fish and we are not strong enough to catch them. In Japan, we can't use bus with wheelchair. It's very hard. Very hard. So it's very nice here.
When we arrived at the airport, for example, there's 60 wheelchair cabs, accessible cabs there. So we were able to just come off the airplane, get right on a cab and go to the hotel. No wait. This is what all big cities should be like. One day we decided that we would go for a little trip. So we took the ferry boat across, which was totally accessible. Then went up to Gross Mountain, which was accessible on the tram.
I'd like to welcome everyone to Gross Mountain this afternoon. Just tell you a little bit about the mountain and the view on the way up.
Get out of here on the dance floor and do your thing for us. That's what we're here for, to have a good time and get to know each other, have some fun.
One of the things that I think will surprise a lot of people is seeing people in chairs up on the dance floor dancing. Unless you happen to know somebody in a chair or you run into this situation, a lot of people still think that people in wheelchairs can't get out and do what everybody else is doing, you know, have an active social life, go dancing, partying, all the things that everybody else takes for granted. But if you're disabled, you're not allowed to do those things.
Is there any braille around that a blind person could read?
When you organize a conference of this size, you expect to have problems. I don't think anybody expected the problems that the blind ran into with not having braille, or the deaf and not having interpreters in some of the sessions.
And every time I have communicated with this conference, I have said, I need braille. I haven't paid $320 to come to this conference to not have a lousy program.
And this is the last gathering that I expected to feel like a second-class citizen at.
If we don't have it at 2, at that point we meet and we occupy somebody's office.
I think if we don't have it at 10, we occupy somebody's office.
We don't have it right now.
I think we should make the point now. Well, I want to make the point now.
You didn't think of making it accessible for us to have the translating done in French.
We don't participate at the same basis. We don't feel equal.
sighted.
They always leave us out. Why is it always the blind people that get left out?
We want them to acknowledge it publicly and apologize, and they haven't committed themselves to doing that yet.
That's blind
There's a lot of barriers in here.
That we're second-class citizens, even in the minds of the disability movement.
That we're being
Whenever you're in trouble, you can stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Won't you stand now? Stand by me.
Blind Canadians and our international visitors deserve an apology and a commitment on behalf of the organizers that Braille materials will become available to us immediately and will be distributed to people who need them.
When we see two groups attempt to come together, there we see problems. There, equality is not necessarily achieved. The time has come for us to learn the needs, the situations, and the priorities of each group, and to give honor and respect to those differences.
Does it surprise me? Sadly not, actually. Sadly not, no. We get rather used to these things as blind people.
What's been your experience here as a blind person?
Inadequate facilities. The volunteers haven't been properly trained. There's no accessible materials. It's pretty typical, I have to say. I mean, it's not atypical. Conferences are like this.
Where do you start? You know, we've learned a lot of things about accessibility. You try and plan to be as well organized as you can possibly be. You try to anticipate that things are going to go wrong. And with those anticipations, you try and head off whatever confrontations or problems that you're going to have. And sometimes that doesn't always work. So, you know, it's been a tremendous learning experience, and I think if we were part of the organizing committee to do it a second time, there are a lot of things that we would do differently. Some things we would do the same, but you would probably see a completely revamped event from top to bottom.
A lot of people were upset with the lack of media at the event. There were reporters from various countries that were disabled reporters that were reporting on what was going on.
How involved are you with Disabled Persons International, or have you got a link with them?
Throughout the whole week, there was very little media coverage. They seemed to come out at the opening when the politicians were there, and they seemed to go for the high-profile events when Rick Hansen's doing his tour, but they weren't reporting on the regular seminars and the proceedings that were going on all week long.
It really is functional examples of independent living.
I have a lady in the back.
None of the papers are actually reporting what is happening here. In fact, television, from what I've seen locally, has reported about what wonders the Super Crips doing. I haven't seen anything about the workshops, about what DPI has been doing, about we as disabled people have been doing here over the last few days.
It's more of the same shit that a lot of us have had to live with for years. You know, I'm a psychiatric survivor, so guess what's in the Globe and Mail? Oh, Charles Manson, great. You know, that means that everybody who's so-called crazy is dangerous, right? This is what the Globe and Mail and all the media do.
Anybody that has a brown badge on is press, okay? And
there's going to be a hanging.
So most of the media are in and out of this place or at one time in the room, so.
So is there any way then that you can arrange to try and get those people who are representing the various media formats to come here and meet with us so that we can ask them why they're not truly representing what's going on here at this conference.
See, what we're concerned about is that this is going on here. We have so many people from different countries, the associations for cross-disability here, and just the coverage is not here. We're not seeing it in the media. We're not seeing it in the amount and the type that we should see. Like the workshops, what's going on in the workshops, not just the super people who are here, but what about the content of the workshops?
I had more coverage when I started a post-polio group in Quebec in 6 months than I've seen here for an international thing.
It's not just that it's international, it's the fact that it's the first time ever that there's been the numbers of disabled people actually in one place doing so much work around empowerment of ourselves as individuals.
It's as if they don't exist, as if we don't exist, as if we don't exist.
Because you'll get a flavor for what the spirit of independence is all about. It gives you a sense of not only what is possible for the future, but what is happening today in terms of...
The press will certainly show stories about the brave and the wonderful, and in fact the evil disabled person who's committed this onerous crime.
Yeah.
But they're not reporting what we're doing, which is
Exactly.
that we're doing a very positive thing here in various ways, and it's just not coming across.
And more fatalistic time, we were crippled, blind, deaf and dumb, simple-minded, touched, cursed, damned, burned, shunned, hidden away, hidden away.
From what people told me, none of the mainstream media have really covered this. And I'm curious about why. I mean, is that because, you know, does that have to do with how able-bodied people, you know, feel or fear about disability or what?
I think that's true. I think that the media have largely, that the mainstream media have largely ignored this event, but then they wouldn't they, to be honest? I mean, disability issues are ignored largely in the mainstream media. I think but that's what we've come to expect until disabled people, including those of us in the media, force it onto the political agenda by making people take a position, however uncomfortable that may be, we're going to remain very much marginalised discussion, and it's part of the. It says more about the level at which the organisations of disabled people are at the moment and where they've still to go, despite the progress that's been made, than it does commentating on the media, because I think the media, you know, aren't going to take notice unless something exciting or interesting is happening.
I don't think that we as people with disability have made this stuff accessible to the media, and that's our problem, not the media's problem and not the society's problem. We've got to learn how to make the material easy for the media to get hold of and readily available. Now, there's more stories here than you can shake a stick at. There's a wheelchair that climbs stairs that is virtually the first time it's been seen in public. You could write a story comparing that with a guy called Ralph Hodgkins from California who makes wheelchairs for developing countries where they can make it themselves. That would be a really interesting contrast. You've got the high-tech and the really low-tech stuff. If we had people here who were looking for those stories, preparing the releases, organising the media briefings, and giving it to the media on a platter. I mean, these people are busy. They don't have time to send media people here day after day hoping to get a story. We've got to help them by providing it for them.
People are gaining information in the world in which they live by the news more and more. And news is market-driven, it's mostly negative. And so it can really undermine people. And if we don't sort of recognize that media is what it is and use it for what it is, but look at alternate forms of communication to deliver messages. So we're not entrenched in expecting news to deliver our messages. I mean, there's a lot of excellent opportunities out there that we're just not accessing.
The effect of AIDS in the disability community, one of the most important effects is the fact that it puts back on the community.
Almost every subject that you can think of dealing with people with disabilities was covered at this conference.
I feel that I'm just starting to learn, starting to live, actually. Sure, some of you say, oh, he's an old man, and all the rest of it. No, I didn't get out of the institution until 78. And I put it this way, I'm just starting to live.
Throughout the week, it became obvious right at the very beginning that we were going to miss an awful lot. And that would be disappointing because there were so many people from different countries that were at this event that you would want to see and hear everybody, but that wouldn't be possible.
It's very, very appropriate that Patrick Worth speak first, because he is a person first.
The turnout for the plenary sessions and the keynote speakers was very impressive. You look around the room was so large. People were way at the back, but they had screens all over the place. It was the only way that you could see it. It was unbelievable just looking around at the number of people that were there for these sessions.
People First grew in our hearts.
A very powerful speech was delivered by Pat Worth from People First. He was talking about how so many people have been labeled mentally retarded and how their association was fighting to change that attitude.
We organized ourselves to teach the public about why we should not be labeled as anything but people first. We started with associations that called themselves mentally retarded. And now today, those associations call themselves community living. And it's because People First members took a stand, a universal stand all across Canada. And we said that we are fed up with being labeled. We said that we are people like anybody else and we should be treated like anybody else. I felt for many, many years in my own life in being isolated and segregated that I was actually mentally retarded and that there was something wrong with me. You know, certainly other people convinced me of that by telling me that almost every day. But in People First, I began to realize that I could have self-confidence. I could respect myself. And I am not mentally handicapped, but I am a person like everybody else.
Most people with disabilities live in third world countries. And for those people, it's not an easy life.
Disabled people all over the world are condemned to poverty, underdevelopment, which manifests itself in abject poverty, pitiful lives, street begging.
That was the theme of a speech by Joshua Malinga, who was one of the founders of Disabled Persons International.
Those of us who met by some accident of fortune in Winnipeg in 1980, identified the issues faced by disabled people and also decided on a course of action to take. Our vision was to create a worldwide movement and in which to create a world where there was full participation and equality by disabled people and where disabled people enjoyed the same rights with other people and where disabled people were afforded equal opportunities.
Today, the words are human rights, dignity, empowerment, the right of disabled people to represent themselves.
Henry Enns, along with Joshua Malinga, was one of the founding members of Disabled Persons International.
Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, in 1982, the United Nations proclaimed the World Program of Action. The World Program of Action, once and for all, says disabled people are emancipated. We will no longer be in bondage. We have tasted liberation, and we will take that liberation and become free citizens. Disabled people are citizens with rights in their country, and that was spelled out very clear in the World Program of Action.
First off, I want to explain one little thing. I'm really nervous, so please bear with me.
One hidden disability that I learned more about at this conference was mental illness.
As
as long as we are invisible to the rest of the disability movement, we will never be able to take our place in it.
That was you. I had one older brother, and at the age of 10, I became a victim of incest. I felt alone, frightened, and unsure of myself as a person. By the time I was 15, I had ran away. I went to Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and finally the streets of Toronto. By the time I had 3 children, I had attempted suicide 3 times. Consumer survivors have been an oppressed group since time began. Mental health professionals who traditionally and presently hold the most power within the system are the most reluctant to give any of their power away.
We are the only disability group I know of where the law empowers professionals to detain and treat us without our consent. For instance, I know of people in Japan who are locked up to hide their family's shame. With no legal channels to get out of hospital, they are stuck there indefinitely. A man from Zimbabwe at this Congress has been committed to a local hospital here because others could not cope with his distress. Typically, in all countries, people can be committed to hospitals when they choose not to be there because the people around them cannot cope anymore. And there are the treatments themselves, especially electric shock treatment and psychiatric drugs. I remember Michael, a native Maori of my country, New Zealand, who died alone in solitary confinement from a complication arising from electric shock treatment. Many people suffer permanent memory loss from this treatment.
My fear of falling without you leaps up in my heart, becoming real. I look and there you are, lying at my feet, my golden lab, my cane.
All the bells and whistles and all the little accessories that everybody else has, we also have.
Well, we have a lot of nice colors, you can see that, and most of the chairs are contemporary in their styling, and the way we look at disability is not being so, deadening, I guess. It's something it's just another challenge.
A popular feature of the conference was Independence Street. Here people had the opportunity to look at new products, to see what's new on the market, and to try them out.
Now we can proceed down the stairs. There's a brake on the unit as well, so I can stop at any point or feather the speed of descent, depending on my need.
Excuse me? Thanks. That's okay. It will attach to almost any wheelchair. It'll take you almost anywhere and faster than you can go manually pushing your chair.
The cost is right now, the retail price, about $21,500 American dollars.
My chair costs $150. So for the price of yours, I could buy, what, 143 of these, right?
143 of those.
This one was made in Nicaragua for $150. And it's a fairly simple chair. It's a folding chair, a folding ultralight sports type. The biggest problem with most people in the world, of course, is the cost of the initial chair. 4 out of 5 people in the world have no wheelchair yet.
Right.
And by lowering the price of the chair, we hope to break $100 soon.
Right, yes.
Just whittling it down bit by bit will make it more available.
Right. do you find places that you can't go with your chair and that you would be able to with ours?
Yes, and I find many places that I could go with my chair that I couldn't go with yours.
Like what?
Like in the typical latrine. Yours wouldn't fit, and mine does.
I see.
One thing that impressed me were the large numbers of women that were at the conference. More women are becoming active and taking charge of their life and fighting for change.
I think you're seeing a lot of women here from a lot of countries who can now finally have a voice. Very, very important.
They want to be seen as women, not as disabled women. They want the opportunity to have an active social life. They want to put an end to sexual assault, which is a major problem around the world.
Disabled women has been raped, and they have children, and this has also been kept in the family. They don't bring it out. They don't go to the court or police, anything, because of shame. It's gonna bring to the community or mainly to the family.
It's like we were sheep thrown to the wolves to be slaughtered, and so we had to find our way. So we're trying to see how we can lessen that kind of a problem with the young ones and the newly disabled women.
Mainly with the mentally retarded women there, we have many life experiences about sex abuse too.
Violence for disabled women is at least twice as high as it is for non-disabled women. It's not acceptable for any woman to have violence against her. Disabled women are much more vulnerable to it because of their disability, because of sometimes all the caregivers that are around them that have an opportunity, that are providing personal care, the transit drivers. I mean, we're in a very scary situation, and women sometimes may not even talk about it till years later. They may not even have the language developed to be able to talk about it. So certainly within Canada, violence against disabled women has been a top issue for us, and we've produced research on it and papers. We have a brand new manual called Meeting Our Needs, which has been developed for transition houses, and we fight all the time to get good funding so that rape crisis service centers can talk to women with sign language so they can be accessible, so that all women's shelters will be accessible and we wouldn't have to stay in a situation because we couldn't get in the front door.
Really, they're not prepared. Nobody really sit and talk with them. So what you find is that they become pregnant, they're not able to cope, they don't understand, they were never prepared for it. They don't understand how to deal with it, and so the problems come in, they're not employed, there is no one to help them, and it's like, you know, I wanted something for myself and I've had an added burden, and how can we work with it? But we try and help them in whatever way we can.
And I like to get more involved with women's movements or, you know, groups like this, so I can learn more and help with my own country where I come from.
A woman's healing song.
I think we're still a bit inclined to think that people with disabilities wouldn't have sex, let alone women with disabilities discussing those sorts of issues with regard to intimacy and relationship.
People do see us as not people who are capable of being wives, mothers, caregivers, you know. They just see us, you're disabled and that's it.
In Australia, for example, when I was working with children with disabilities, somebody happened to remark in front of some of my children when I left the room that people like me shouldn't be allowed to have children if that's what I'm going to produce. And I mean, I think that whole concept is very relevant for a lot of us. I mean, I haven't had children, and that has been by choice, but I think that with those sorts of comments, we're a long way behind.
A lot of able-bodied people feel that if you're disabled, your life is useless, that you don't have anything to look forward to. It's not true. All you had to do was talk to the people that were at this conference.
There's this whole image of the able-bodied person as being the perfect species, and everything else is secondary.
I was at a Royal Commission on Reproductive Technology public hearing, and we were discussing gender selection by prenatal testing. And of course, it was obvious that gender selection was not socially acceptable. I tried to make a small point, and that being that prenatal testing was designed and deliberately, programmatically delivered to the Canadian population for women of certain ages for the express purpose of discovering embryos that might result in the birth of children with disabilities, and that there was a coercive kind of procedure whereby the would-be parents were encouraged to terminate those pregnancies. And I talked about what that said about the value of life as a disabled person in our society. And it was very upsetting for people to have to confront that fact in our society. And people refuse to confront it. But it is the truth. And it is a truth that we have to identify and dispute with.
In regards to what you were saying just now about people having the choice of terminating their pregnancies, I know so many people who have enriched my life who, if their parents had been given that choice, would probably not be here. And I feel that it's a bit of a crime that even through the technological advancement that people are possibly not being allowed to live because of their disabilities that they may have when they're born.
That's right. Technology has made it possible for many people with various disabilities to survive and to flourish in our society. But when a family are faced with a challenge of bringing up a child with a disability that they're not familiar with, I find at least a range of responses. Those that love life and love the support of people and find their beauty and their value, and those that are fearful of it and more concerned with their social well-being in society and their social status, and find that a disabled person would be a drag in that society. And often those parents want to put those individuals, their children, into institutions. And I think there's still a debate and a dilemma going on in many families' lives as to, do I give my life to my children with disabilities, or do I give my life to my career or my surroundings? And I think that in the long run, we're going to find that as more and more disabled people are visible, active, participating, leading members of our society, less and less fear and stigma will be associated with disability. We've moved a long way in the last 20 years from the days we go into a pub and everyone would buy us a beer. We couldn't buy our own beer. This was courageous. Now they don't even look at us in the pub. We have to buy our own beer. So that's progress.
There's no doubt about it that the greatest achievement that we've made is the development of self-help grassroots organizations. I mean, 10 years ago, even 15 years ago when we started here in Canada, it was like banging your head against a brick wall. even the words were not acceptable. Consumer movement, participation, human rights, equality. When you talked about disabled people, these were words that were simply not acceptable. Governments would argue against them. So we've made some headway. I mean, the problem we still have that it's a lot of lip service. You go to the UN, they have the World Program of Action, and the UN bureaucrats and many of the departments don't understand it. If they do understand it, they have all kinds of ways that they try to get around it about, you know, not really involving disabled people. We've had to fight like everything to get disabled people included in the UN experts meeting. We've had to fight like everything to create some kind of mechanism, and we still don't have it, of disabled people advising the UN on a regular kind of a basis. That is the issue that we still face, and that's going to be the biggest issue till the year 2000, to actually have meaningful ways of involving the grassroots organizations. Then you look at the millions and millions of disabled people in the rural areas. You look at disabled women, you look at minority groups like mentally handicapped people, who in most parts of the world are still not organized. I mean, that is the biggest challenge that we still face. And without that kind of organization, the actual difference that all of these things make in the everyday life of disabled people is very minimal.
I don't want you to speak for me. I got my own autonomy. I want choices and rights in our lives. Come on. Choices and rights. That's what we've got to fight for. Choices and rights in our lives. I don't want your sorrow. I don't want your fear. I want choices and rights in our lives.
A major part of the conference was the entertainment. The performers, as much as the speakers, let us know what this revolution was all about.
Choices and rights in our lives. We don't want your charity or you to be paid to care for me. I want choices and rights in our lives.
Every major rights movement, civil rights movement, has had an arts movement that's reflected that. And it's a very important way of, a different way of making the same kind of statement.
I think it's about creating a culture, a counterculture, to demonstrate to both disabled people themselves that they can be proud and they have an identity which is positive. But also to non-disabled people that we're not passive people who are pushed around on the wheelchair dance floor. We can actually do the thing. We can actually be the musicians, be the writers, be the artists, be the dancers. I think that's a really important message to get across. And I think that's what we're trying to transmit. We're trying to transmit, I think, two messages. One is obviously about rights for disabled people around the world. But also a message of sort of pride and being proud in who you are as a disabled person. And any artist who is trying to approach any art form would want to put the whole self in and not leave the disability out. And I think that's what we mean by disability arts. Disability is a part of our lives. It can be a very positive part of our lives. You know, it could be a lot more positive if, you know, governments did certain things.
Choices and rights, that's what we've got to fight for. Choices and rights in our lives. Thank you very much, Vancouver. Stay strong and proud. Proud to be disabled. Yo! Thank you.
You know, we knew that Independence 92 was not going to be an easy project. If it was easy, we probably wouldn't have tried it. We knew that there were going to be many challenges along the way, bringing together so many people with so many different interests. Well, there were many difficulties. But I can say to you right now that this project had a lot of people working so hard to try to meet those challenges. Those challenges are learning experiences for all of us. Sure, there were many risks about holding this project. We said to ourselves, those risks were worth taking. Because if we can't come together amongst ourselves, people with so many different interest groups, but yet something so much in common, and if we can't solve these issues here in our own house, how can we expect the society in which we live to be able to solve our issues? Someone once told me that the greatest agent for change is the principle of first seeking to understand before we seek to be understood. Personally, I believe this is important. Those of us in Independence 92 truly have listened, and we have learned, and we have understood. Each of us will be able to move forward from here, because independence is now the past. And we are living in the present, and we are looking forward to the future. And when we move forward to the future, we ask ourselves one question: what next? How can we keep the dream alive? We must work hard. We must redouble our efforts. We must continue to work together as a team. No great social change comes about in isolation. Together we are power. Together we can succeed.
I hope to God it doesn't fall and break my
Well, she'll be fine. Don't worry. The boys use this all the time.
You ever watch my head?
Yeah, we're going to have to bend you down a little bit.
And let me give you a card.
There's room for you.
Okay.
For me, Independence 92 was an opportunity to celebrate the achievements over the last 10 years. But it's also, you have to sort of lament. You have to look back and look at the problems that are going on right now. If you look around, there's still an awful lot of people that are unemployed. There's a lot of people that need housing. There's people that can't afford a wheelchair. All these problems are major, and it's not changing fast enough. Let's put it that way. We've still got to struggle. We've still got to fight to become individuals, to become people. We're still looked at as a disability first, and then as a person second. We don't want charity. We want people to be aware of our needs, and we have to fight for that.
I think it's been a very successful endeavor. I'm pleased with the overall outcome. I think it was in some ways an experiment, and it certainly was an exercise in contrast, but it was very positive.
It's the feeling of belonging somewhere. I think that's the most, and not belonging to some tiny bitty, teeny weeny society of nuts, but it's belonging to a huge, enormous, self-respecting, proud community that has a role to play in our society, and that's, yeah, fantastic.
I learned that although we're all different, we all have similar needs, and I think I learned the need that we all have to work together. It's not an individual issue, and the only way that we can get ahead is by working together.
I mean, this is more than words can say. It's not only emotional, it's also a feeling of empowerment, an enormous force, an enormous drive, and people are ready to take over a feeling of pride.
I want choices and rights, choices and rights. I want choices and rights in our lives. We don't want your charity, or you to be paid to care for me. I want choices and rights in our lives. I don't want to be in your care, or stuck someplace out there. I want choices and rights in our lives. Try and sing this. Choices and rights, that's what we've got to fight for. Choices and rights in our lives. choices and rights in our lives. I don't want you to speak for me. I got my own autonomy. I want choices and rights in our lives. Come on. Choices and rights. That's what we've got to fight for. Choices and rights in our lives. I don't want your sorrow. I don't want your fear. I want choices and rights in our lives. I don't want your guilt trip. I don't want your tears. I want choices and rights in our lives. Choices and rights. That's what we've got to fight for. Choices and rights in our lives. We don't want your special schools. We're gonna get out, teach the fools. We got choices and rights in our lives. And I'm not gonna stick out my hand. Together we're gonna make a stand for choices and rights in our lives. Come on, sing along. Choices and rights. That's what we've got to fight for. Choices and rights in our lives. Thank you very much, Vancouver. Stay strong and proud. Proud to be disabled. Yo!